The rooftop lights glittered against the dark Manhattan skyline, but all Jessica could feel was the heat of humiliation burning through her. One of the men's hands had gripped her hip while another yanked the thin strap of her silk dress until it snapped the sound loud enough for the surrounding guests to gasp. Her clutch fell to the floor. Their laughter was louder than the music cutting through her composure like glass. Jessica Lane, 27, had worked the better part of the evening touching up the faces of the wealthy guests and influencers at this high-profile charity event. As one of the city's rising freelance makeup artists, she knew appearances mattered. The party was supposed to be a networking opportunity, a place to hand out her business cards and maybe land a client with enough reach to boost her career. Instead, she was standing under the glare of overhead lights, her bare shoulder exposed, three intoxicated men circling like jackals. The trouble had started earlier when one of them, a red-faced banker named Trevor, had insisted she get him another drink. When she politely told him she wasn't part of the wait staff, the comments turned crude. She brushed it off at first, hoping they'd lose interest. But with each drink, their boldness grew. By the time they cornered her near the terrace railing, she could feel the hot breath of trouble on her neck. The crowd was split half awkwardly, turning away, not wanting to get involved, and half watching, with that guilty fascination reserved for public confrontations. One woman whispered something to her friend, but made no move to help. A man in a designer suit stood frozen, gripping his champagne flute like it was part of the decor. Jessica's heart was pounding, but not from fear. It was from the effort of holding herself back. She thought of her father, a retired NYPD officer who'd started teaching her self-defense when she was 15. Most people never want a fight, he'd said, but if one comes to you, you make sure you end it on your terms. She'd taken those lessons seriously, training in kickboxing through college, though most of her friends knew her only for her artistry with a makeup brush. Now, as Trevor's friend, an equally drunk man with slicked back hair, leaned in and whispered something filthy in her ear, Jessica knew the line had been crossed. The strap was gone. Her dignity was hanging by a thread, and she could feel the crowd waiting to see what she would do. She took a slow breath, her right foot shifting back slightly, centering her balance. Her hands, which moments ago had been holding a compact mirror and powder puff, curled loosely at her sides. The men didn't notice, too wrapped up in their own cruel amusement. Jessica's eyes locked on the biggest one, Trevor, who was smirking, as if he'd already won whatever twisted game they were playing. She tilted her head slightly, her lips forming the faintest, almost polite smile. They thought she was about to back down. They were wrong. Trevor's smirk widened when Jessica stepped forward. "That's better," he said, his words dripping with alcohol and arrogance. "Knew you'd come around." His friends chuckled, emboldened by the crowd's silence. Jessica didn't answer. Her gaze swept the terrace, the marble tiles slick with condensation from the cool night air. The railing a few feet behind the men, the cluster of guests shifting uncomfortably near the bar. She noted the positions instinctively, the way she had in every sparring match. Space-footing angles. Her heart rate slowed as her breathing evened. Years of training were sliding back into place like muscle memory, overriding the initial shock. She remembered her father's voice. "Don't let their words control you. Control the moment." Trevor's friend, with the slicked back hair, Mark. She thought she'd heard someone call him, stepped closer, brushing the back of his hand against her bare arm. "Smooth," he muttered, his tone mocking. "You must moisturize a lot." His buddy laughed. Something inside Jessica tightened. She shifted her weight to her left foot, letting the motion look casual. From the corner of her eye, she saw a man in a navy suit glance toward security, then shake his head and turn away. No help was coming. Not yet. "You're a quiet one," Trevor said, leaning down so close she could smell the whiskey on his breath. I like that in a girl. Means you can shut up now. Jessica cut in her voice low, calm, and sharp enough to slice through the humid air. That made him blink. His friends exchanged a glance, unsure if they'd heard her right. Mark's some smirk faltered for half a second before he forced it back. Trevor chuckled, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in it. Oh, she's got a little fire, he said. Maybe we'll... Her eyes narrowed. Her pulse was steady now, her stance anchored. She could feel the energy building in her core, the kind that preceded every decisive strike in the gym. The third man, a lean, twitchy type, who hadn't spoken much, finally muttered, Trevor, maybe chill, man. She's fine, Trevor interrupted his arrogance, snapping back into place. He reached out, fingers curling toward her waist. That was his mistake. Jessica didn't move yet. She let the moment hang, the crowd holding its collective breath. Every sound, the clink of ice in a glass, the faint thump of bass from the DJ, faded into background noise. She was focused entirely on the weight shift in Trevor's stance, the way his shoulder rotated as his arm extended. Mark leaned in again, clearly thinking she was still cornered. His grin was back teeth flashing under the warm terrace lights. Jessica's lips curved in a faint smile. Not a friendly one, a knowing one. They were seconds away from finding out just how wrong they were about her. Trevor's hand brushed the fabric of her dress, but it never made it to her waist. In the space of a heartbeat, Jessica shifted her right leg, coiled like a spring, and unleashed a roundhouse kick that snapped through the air with a sharp thwack. Her heel connected with the side of his jaw, the impact sending him sprawling backward into the railing. The metallic clang echoed across the terrace, followed by a stunned silence that seemed to swallow the music. For a moment, Trevor didn't move his head, lolling against the polished metal eyes, blinking in confusion. His drink slipped from his hand, tumbling to the floor and shattering into a spray of amber liquid and glass. Gasps erupted from the crowd. A few phones went up, instantly capturing the moment. Someone let out a low whistle. Another murmured, "Holy, did you see that?" Mark froze, his smirk gone. His gaze darted between his dazed friend and Jessica, whose stance was steady, balanced on the balls of her feet, her eyes locked on him like a predator, sighting its next target. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Mark barked. But his voice cracked halfway through. He took a step toward her, trying to reclaim the dominance that had evaporated with Trevor's fall. Jessica didn't answer. She took a single step forward, her weight still evenly distributed, her chin slightly lowered. It was the posture of someone ready to move again fast. The lean, twitchy man backed up immediately, hands raised. "Hey, I'm not," he started, but Mark's pride wouldn't let him retreat. "You think you're tough?" Mark sneered, his voice louder now, as though volume alone could hide his unease. "Try that with..." Jessica moved before he could finish. A quick sidestep brought her within striking distance, and her right knee came up in a controlled but brutal arc, driving into his midsection. The force folded him forward, with a loud oof, the air rushing out of his lungs. Mark dropped to his knees, clutching his stomach. His earlier swagger replaced with the desperate gasp of someone struggling to breathe. The crowd's reaction was louder this time, cheers mixed with disbelieving laughter. Trevor groaned from the railing, pushing himself up, slowly, his jaw swollen. "You crazy." She turned toward him sharply, and he froze mid-word, the memory of her kick written across his face. Jessica's breathing was calm, almost unnervingly so. The adrenaline was there, but controlled, flowing exactly where she wanted it. Someone near the bar called out, "Security's on their way." She kept her eyes on the three of them, her posture making it clear that if they moved in her direction again, they'd regret it even more. Trevor spat onto the floor, his pride bleeding out faster than the whiskey in his veins. Mark was still kneeling, one hand on the ground for support. The third man had pressed himself against the far wall, shaking his head as if to say he wanted no part of it anymore. But Jessica knew This wasn't over just yet. Men like this didn't just back down, they tested boundaries until they were forced to remember them. And she was ready to remind them again if she had to. Trevor staggered upright, gripping the railing for balance, his eyes glassy but burning with humiliation. "You think you can make a fool out of me in front of everyone," he snarled, spittle flying from his lips. The partygoers near the back began pulling out their phones, sensing something explosive was about to happen. Jessica's gaze didn't waver. She stood with one foot slightly back shoulders, loose weight ready to shift in any direction. "You did that to yourself," she said, her tone flat but edged with steel. Mark was still on his knees wheezing, but he managed to grab at her ankle in a clumsy attempt to destabilize her. Jessica reacted instantly, pivoting on her free leg and driving her heel into his shoulder. The blow knocked him sideways onto the tiles where he lay groaning. Trevor lunged forward, trying to use his size to overpower her, but Jessica sidestepped smoothly, his momentum carrying him past her. In the same motion, she hooked her arm under his and locked it in a standing armbar, torquing it just enough to make his knees buckle. "Ah!" His yell was loud enough to cut over the music. The crowd erupted in cheers, now no longer hesitant to pick a side. People were filming from every angle. Some shouted encouragement. Others simply stared in awe. The third man, who had been clinging to the wall, decided to play the hero for his friends. He rushed toward her from behind, but Jessica released Trevor in one controlled motion and spun her leg, whipping around in a low sweep. The man's feet were kicked out from under him, and he hit the floor hard, skidding a few inches on the polished tile. All three men were now on the ground, Trevor cradling his arm, Mark clutching his stomach, and the third groaning from the impact of the fall. The once rowdy party atmosphere had shifted entirely. Guests were leaning in, laughing at the spectacle, whispering to each other in disbelief. Jessica's chest rose and fell evenly. Every move had been precise, intentional, no wasted motion, no uncontrolled fury. Years of training had drilled that discipline into her. From the corner of her eye, she saw the elevator doors open. Two large security guards stepped onto the terrace, scanning the scene. Their eyes widened as they took in the sight of the three men sprawled on the floor, and the slender woman standing calmly among them. "She attacked us!" Trevor shouted immediately, his voice cracking. One of the guards raised an eyebrow. "Pretty sure the cameras will tell us otherwise," he said flatly, nodding toward the security lenses tucked in the terrace corners. Mark tried to stand, but stumbled, still hunched over. The third man didn't even attempt to get up. Jessica glanced toward the crowd. There were at least a dozen phones pointed at them, recording every second. The evidence was undeniable. Security moved in, pulling the three men to their feet and marching them toward the exit. Trevor kept muttering threats under his breath, but none of them dared look her in the eye. Jessica stayed where she was, calm and steady, as the murmurs of admiration rippled through the guests. Some applauded openly, others simply shook their heads in stunned respect. But this wasn't over, not for her, because what she'd done tonight wasn't just about defending herself. It was about sending a message that would follow those men for a very long time. The terrace doors swung shut behind the security guards, cutting off the last muffled protests from Trevor and his friends. The hum of conversation filled the air again, but now it carried a different energy, charged curious and tinged with admiration. Jessica stood near the railing, straightening the broken strap of her dress as best she could. Her hands were steady, her breathing calm, but the adrenaline still hummed in her veins like a live wire. People began approaching her in cautious waves. A tall woman in a red gown stepped forward first. I saw everything she said, her voice equal parts awe and disbelief. That was incredible. Jessica gave a small, polite smile. It was necessary. Others chimed in. Someone offered her a shawl, which she accepted gratefully, draping it over her shoulder. A man in a tailored tuxedo extended his business card, muttering something about working together on a campaign shoot. Another guest, an influencer she recognized from Instagram, asked if they could take a selfie together. The shift in the crowd was palpable. 10 minutes ago, they'd been silent bystanders. Now, they were eager to align themselves with her, to be part of the story they just witnessed. Still, Jessica's mind kept replaying the moment. Trevor's hand reached for her, the snap of her dress strap, the smirks that told her they thought they owned the situation. That image wouldn't leave quickly, even if she had flipped the ending. A tap on her shoulder pulled her back. It was one of the security guards, a square-jawed man with a professional but friendly expression. "We reviewed the footage," he said. "You were well within your rights. Those guys are being escorted off the property and banned from future events." "Thank you," she said simply. He nodded toward the group of guests still watching her. "If you ever decide to switch careers, you'd make a hell of a bouncer." She chuckled lightly at that, but part of her knew she'd never need to change careers to prove her strength again. Word would spread after tonight. As the party slowly returned to its earlier rhythm, Jessica slipped away from the center of attention, moving toward the quiet edge of the terrace. From up here, the city stretched out in glittering lines of light, indifferent to the chaos and triumph that had just unfolded. She took one last deep breath, the cool night air filling her lungs. The humiliation she'd felt earlier had burned away, replaced by something steadier pride. Not the loud gloating kind, but the quiet confidence of someone who knew her worth and wasn't afraid to defend it. Inside, the music swelled, drawing the crowd back to the dance floor. Jessica lingered a moment longer, knowing she'd walk back in with her head high, not as the makeup artist who'd been harassed, but as the woman who'd stood her ground. Tonight, she hadn't just protected herself. She'd reminded everyone watching, including herself, that some lines should never be crossed. And if they were, she was more than ready to make sure the offender never forgot it. In life, moments of confrontation can reveal more about us than years of calm. Jessica's night began with humiliation, but she chose not to let fear dictate her actions. Instead, she stood firm, defended herself, and reclaimed control of the situation. Strength doesn't always mean throwing a kick. It's the ability to know your worth, to protect your dignity, and to demand respect without apology. Whether in a crowded rooftop party or a quiet corner of everyday life, the lesson is the same. You have the right to stand your ground, and no one has the right to take that from you.